My name is Sheila Mackay, and I am a member of Age Friendly Edmonton's Ageism Hub and the subcommittee which organized this event. Other members on the panel are Kathy Harvey, co-chair, Glenda Tarnowski, co-chair, Dorothy Lowry, and Carolyn G., Age Friendly Edmonton's community connector at the Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Convention. This event has been sponsored by Age Friendly Edmonton, which is a collaboration between the Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Council and the City of Edmonton. The panel is one of 3 special events to celebrate Seniors Week 2021. We want to honor those who came before us. We have this opportunity to learn and to share knowledge together. We acknowledge the traditional land on which Edmonton sits, the territory of Treaty 6 First Nations and the homelands of the Métis people. We call upon all our collective honored traditions to work together to build this great city of Edmonton. Now it is my honor to introduce Minister of Seniors and Housing, Josephine Pon. Minister Pon was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta in April 16, 2019, and was appointed as Alberta's Minister of Seniors and Housing. She is working to ensure that Albertans have access to quality and affordable housing, and that our seniors have the resources and care they need. Please welcome Minister Pon.
Happy Senior Week to all wonderful and dedicated people who serve and support seniors throughout Alberta. This is a very special time of years as we recognize and celebrate seniors and all they have contributed to our family, our community, and our province. Last year, due to a pandemic, we celebrate a different kinds of a Seniors Week. We found creative and a wonderful way to connect with seniors. I love the small but lively parade that passed by seniors residents. We made the best of a difficult time just as we continue to do today. This show of true Albertan spirit has made Seniors Week a grand tradition. Thank you for all you have done to support seniors during this pandemic. To those who have lost a loved one due to COVID-19, my sympathy and thoughts are with you. To all seniors who stay in isolation and learn new ways of supporting and connecting with each other, their family, and their community, and I admire you. To the caregiver and communities organizations staff and the volunteers who stay strong and often put their own health at risk to keep seniors safe and well, I send my appreciations. As we prepare to come out of the pandemic, we salute all who have bravely faced this difficult time with grace and strength. We are all excited too. Once again, make time to celebrate Seniors Week, as we will do so safely and according to the public health guidelines. Senior build Alberta. And as I always say, they are the strength of our province. Happy Seniors Week, and thank you to all who work so hard for our seniors.
Thank you, Minister Pon. Our moderator for the panel discussion today is Dr. Cherie Kwan-See. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Alberta. Dr. Kwan-See conducts research on the development and impact of age stereotyping and ageism in a real-world context. Additionally, Cherie provides her expertise on age-friendly Edmonton's Ageism Hub. Please welcome Dr. Kwan-See.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. So ageism, not a new term, but one I think that we need to pay more attention to. When I say it's not a new term, it was actually a term that was coined by Robert Butler, geriatrician Robert Butler in the 1960s. And he coined this term to refer to a form of bigotry that he paralleled in importance to racism and other isms. Ageism refers to the systematic stereotyping about the aging process and older people as a special group. So it's the, this happens in aging. I expect this to happen in aging. I expect to lose my competence in older age. It's the stereotyping of what older people are like. So older people are sick and dependent. Okay. The stereotypical beliefs that we hold then can lead to a prejudice and discrimination of people based on age. And you might be thinking, well, it doesn't just happen in older age, it can happen in younger ages as well, such as when we stereotypically believe that all teenagers are lazy. Arguably though, and it is true that ageism can be operative at different parts of the lifetime, but arguably the impacts of ageism are more serious in later life. Lots of research has accumulated since the 1990s that shows that being the recipient of ageism and internalizing those stereotypes about aging can have significant impacts on people's health and well-being. That research is so prominent to the point of knowing that ageism has impacts, that in fact, the World Health Organization in their International Day of the Older Person, the 2016 theme was to take a stand against ageism, okay? Because we know ageism matters. So what can we do to take a stand against ageism? Well, as individuals, we can increase our awareness of what ageism is. And we can increase our awareness by having realistic and balanced and constructive conversations about the aging process and the experiences that each of us experiences with ageism. And that's what this panel today and others in the future are about, to hear people's experiences about growing older and experiences with ageism. And we are delighted to have as our panelists today distinguished Edmontonians, Alice Major, Edmonton's first poet laureate, former city councillor Michael Fair, and University of Alberta nursing professor Donna Wilson, here to talk to us about growing older. So let's begin our panel, and I'll direct the question first to Alice. So Alice, growing older involves many changes, we know that. So thinking about your own experience growing older, could you talk to us about two prominent changes that you think are most notable to you?
Thank you so much, Sherry, and I'm really delighted to be here with you all today. Do you know, the biggest surprise that might have happened in my life, it would really have been for my 12-year-old self. I remember calculating how old I would be in the year 2000, 51. And I thought there would be no point living after that. You know, that would be the end of it. I would have been astonished to find out that that was when I was just publishing a second book of poetry, that there would be many more to come, that I was really just beginning in many ways. In a way, the biggest surprise for me now, though, is to look back and realize all of the history that I have lived through. It's not that I've had a dramatic kind of life, but I have lived through some of the most amazing periods of human history. In my lifetime, there have been astounding discoveries in astronomy and biology. I love science. And of course, it's one of the most important periods in the Earth's history. We've gone from 2.5 billion people in the year I was born to 7.5 billion in one short lifetime. And I'm here. I've been here. It's this kind of perspective that seems to come over me more and more as I get older. The picture gets bigger and bigger, and I feel like it's such a surprising privilege to be this age and able to think about it. So Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Alice. Some wonderful memories that you bring forward, looking backwards and forwards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sunday, this past Sunday. So I was preparing an agenda which I had sent out to a group that I'm chairing, and was putting together a PowerPoint that I wanted to present as part of it. And so I had called a friend of mine who I was on the phone, someone who's probably about a third of my age, asking him to provide me with some assistance as to how I could put that as part of the meeting so that people could see the PowerPoint. 2 hours later, and much frustration, and getting absolutely nowhere, in fact, making things worse, I heard the voice say, "You were born in the wrong generation." And there was a piece of that. So I said, yep, I was born in the wrong generation. I haven't a clue how to get that organized and make that happen. I still can't do it. And after 2 hours of despair kind of thing in that, we both gave up kind of thing in that. And I found that, in fact, I had made my computer even worse than it had been before, and some things coming up that I didn't want to come up at all. So that's just a very recent example. One of the other things that I've noticed about myself is that I, over the last number of years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, I've started to pay attention to obituaries. I don't think I ever remembered or done that before. I do remember my parents, and I could hear them now as they were sitting, and my father saying to my mother, "Oh, did you see that so-and-so died?" My mother said, "Oh yeah, I heard about that. I talked to my friend blah, 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 who knew that he's sick and was dying," kind of thing and that. And all of a sudden, and I thought at the time, oh, why do they care about that kind of thing? Now, I also look at obits, follow the obituaries on a regular basis, to see what's happening to people that some of whom I may well or likely would know. So that's a little bit of reminding me about getting older, the kinds of things that happen. And so I think then I want to check with Donna Wilson, and she would see what she's got to say. Donna, tell us about what you have experienced.
Oh, hello. I hope that it's coming through now. And I think it is. Let me see. There's been some technical issues, so excuse me. There we go. I think they've got me on now. Oh, terrific. Okay. Sorry for the delay, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks everyone actually for organizing this event, the other speakers, and for the people who've tuned in today. I'll just say ageism is just simply discrimination. And while other discriminations have been addressed or are being addressed, ageism is not yet recognized as being common and harmful. Now, I'm 66, which by definition is old. But as more and more people reach 100 years of age and older, actually 66 is pretty young. And in fact, at some point, I think it'll be called middle-aged. And I like to think of myself as young, and I feel young. I've been blessed with good health. I think that makes a big, influence on that. I've had good genes, inherited good genes with long-lasting parents. And I have good life habits, which have helped me get to be age 66. And I hope will carry on throughout my aging process and keep me healthy into old age. Now, asked to talk about two changes with my aging. Well, the first one is an increased awareness of my increasing vulnerability. I am more vulnerable than I was years ago. I don't heal as fast as when I was in my 20s or 30s. I don't bounce back as fast when I fall on the ice or, have kind of other issues. My circle of friends and family are certainly shrinking as well, too. The people that I would have called on before to have some fun with, or to maybe help out, give me some advice or what have you, if they haven't moved away and sort of gone away so they're not accessible, they've died. And in fact, I am an elder orphan at this point. Grandparents, grandparents, step-parents, they're all gone now at this. So really, if I become ill or need help in another way, there's less people to call on to help me, rather temporary or permanent help. But the other big change is I think I've grown stronger. I guess maybe I've grown up over time. It's taken me that long to get to where I actually kind of like myself, you know, a shy farm kid. You know, you have experiences as a nurse. Certainly that's been fantastic. Professor, wife, mother, things that challenge you and give you enormous skills and knowledge that you wouldn't have had when you're 18, 19, 20, or even 36 when I had my first and only child. So I have to say really that all of that experience in my life has built confidence in me. I have something to offer. And it's rounded me and, you know, and sort of roughed off some of the smooth parts of what have you. And, you know, a good friend of mine has a wonderful expression that, you know, a cat couldn't scratch or I'm not at that point, but I know enough to avoid scratching cats. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. So wonderful to hear. And I'm just trying to think, you know, what have we heard in this first set of questions? And it's about balance. There's losses and change, lots of change, but adaptation to that change, loss, but gains, strengths. Wonderful. We're learning. That's what a Lunch and Learn is about. So let's turn to the second question. So reflecting on your experiences, can you think of one or two people in your life that you think have been the most influential in shaping your experience of growing older? And when you talk about these people, in what ways did they impact or shape your experience? Alice.
Well, I have to say that the two people that influenced me most of all, were my parents. Not because they were super seniors or had amazingly long lifespans, but they had very typical lifespans and became frail in their early 80s and moved to Edmonton to live with my husband and I for those final years. Dad had developed Alzheimer's and my mother had kidney cancer. And it was not an easy 4 years to witness up close, but it taught me so much. And I think what it taught me most was not to be afraid. Dementia is cruel and very hard on caregivers, but it never takes away everything. For many people, for many years, people are still capable of embarking on new adventures like moving to Edmonton. And even at the end, the very end, someone is still there. I have a picture of my dad dancing with my mum in the last Christmas before he died. And there is such a sweetness in his expression, a kind of trustfulness in the moment that I always want to hold close. And though it seemed to go on forever at the time, when I look back now, 15 years later, it was such a short time, really, just a fraction of my life and just a fraction of my parents, a fraction of all those years of activity and laughter and hard work and political arguments and tough times. I find this perspective to be really helpful. Of course, there will be difficult times for me too, at the end, as there have been throughout my life, but they don't go on forever and they don't define the wholeness of our lives. So Michael, over to you.
Well, I'm quite humbled. I can almost visualize your parents dancing at Christmas time. A really lovely thought and vision. That so I'm going to talk about a woman named Irene Bathurst, who I had the pleasure of meeting many years ago when I was still a student at university, and my roommate and I rented an apartment. And in the apartment next to us was Irene Bathurst. And of course, we were so you can guess how old we were, and not overly bright and not very conscious about older people, period. Irene turned out to be a woman who was about 80 at that time. And she welcomed us after we were there a bit. And I would say that I was a little, not afraid of her, but not quite sure how to talk and work and think about someone who was 80 years old. But she was so friendly and so expressive, and to myself and my roommate, that we all became good friends and spent time. And Irene's life was one that was marvelous to hear about. She'd married relatively late. She didn't have any children. Her husband died early. Her only sister died early, and her sister's husband died early. She had worked for 30 years at a department store in the city that this was located in. And she'd been retired now for almost 30 years as well. And she was vivacious. She painted. She had a group of women friends that she would spend time with all together. And Irene, a couple of years later, moved to a senior home in the town that we were in. And she had a wonderful time. She loved it. She talked about what was outside. She talked about the friends she made, the games they would play, the stories that they would tell. And she was that way to the last final days and she died, and said she would think she was 93. I can't quite recall the number of years. But what I realized what that meant for me is not only what a pleasure it was to know her and what a joy, but what a wonderful person she was at that age, and that she was someone who had gone through many major portions of life, getting married a little later, then having her husband suddenly die, and then same year her only sister died, and then her sister's husband. She was and then retiring not too long after. She managed all of that and was still that kind of person. It gave me a sense that getting older is something that I could trust was going to be decent, that I could manage, and that would be worthwhile. So she was a really wonderful person, and that I'll never forget. And I think of her often, and that and she and her spirit. So I'll leave it at that. And Donna, we'll see what you got to add.
Thank you. Hard to beat that kind of reflection. But anyway, it's really easy to really come to mind, and I'll just briefly talk about this. Number one, hands down, is my grandmother, who lived into her 90s, and she was just one of those fun, vibrant, constantly learning, interested in everything person. She's an amazing role model. I was so lucky I had her in my life for around 30 years. It's kind of amazing. I have to talk about her a bit. She only finished grade 3 in Ireland because she had to keep helping on the farm, and that's what she really loved. She came to Canada on a ship alone when she was 14. Settled in Winnipeg, worked in Winnipeg until she met her husband-to-be, and they settled on a farm in Saskatchewan. And how she managed to raise 5 children through the Depression and all that, I just, it just really was always something that I marveled over. And she was the spoke of the family. She wrote letters constantly, and she would write you a letter, and there'd be letters from family members and what have you. And she kept us all informed on what was going on in the family. I really miss that. But there's a lot that I miss about her. And some of it was just her learned courage and fortitude, like what she had been through. In fact, it was just the, D-Day, June 6th came around. My dad is alive because she sent a Christmas letter and some Christmas cookies to him that he got just before he walked onto the ship that was going across the English Channel. And he had just got it, as I said, he couldn't sleep. I think he knew it was a big battle coming up. And he was up top reading that letter and munching on the cookies when his ship was torpedoed and sank in minutes. And he was one of the very few survivors of that. And he was in the war 5 years. Now, can you imagine sending your firstborn child away, you know, and wondering and worrying about, you know, about that. So she was an amazing positive influence on me. I learned that older people can be bright and committed and hardworking and interesting and highly valuable and important in your life. But I guess the other really is a compilation of all of the patients that I met as a nurse. And a few really stand out. I was a new nurse and I got to work in a rural hospital in the coronary care unit. And of course, in those days, you were supposed to, you know, jump in and save everyone, but we didn't have the technology to do much about anything. You do CPR and, you know, that was about it. And I remember there was the ambulance, you know, brought in someone who had died. It was a beautiful sunny day. And she had an apron on, and in the apron pockets were clothespins. And she had been out hanging up clothes and passed away. And of course it was, well, let's just, you know, cut off her clothes and do CPR. And I just said, no, let's just respect the dignity of this person. And that came right after I was doing CPR on an older woman who had come in with chest pain. And in those days, at least you could monitor them. You could at least see, you know, that the heart had stopped. You rush in, the crash, you know, wagon and everything comes in. And I'm the one up there kneeling down doing CPR on this woman. I looked down and I realized her eyes were open, that she actually was alert and awake and aware of what was going on to her. And I looked down at her and they smiled as I'm doing my compressions. And I said, oh, sorry, I'm sure this must be so, you know, painful for you, but they're trying to thread in a pacemaker and get your heart going. So just bear with us a little bit. And to the day I die, I will not forget that she reached up with her hand and she patted me. And quite soon after that, they got the pacemaker in and the crisis was over. And she thanked all of us. And, you know, there's so many people like that that I met, you know, older people in particular, that they're just really just impressive, amazing people. Of course, you don't, not everybody is impressive and easy to get along with and everything. There's certainly a wide variety, but again, just unbelievable strength and capacity and what I totally admire older people. You know, what they've had to live with and continue to live with, amazing. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
You know, one of the studies that I've encountered in my life that has influenced me the most was this conference paper that I saw. And it never came out as a published study, but a conference paper from the 1990s. It was a study by Denny and Dew, and they asked, who has influenced you? Who do you think is wise? Who would you nominate? And they had a number of people of different ages in this experiment, but reliably, what people did when they have to talk about who's influenced them, who they consider wise, who they've learned from, people nominate people older than themselves. And it doesn't matter what age you are, you will nominate someone older than yourself. And it's interesting because I do that in my classes, and I've just asked you a question and the same thing happens. And what does it tell us about growing older? It tells us that certainly, as we've heard here, challenges, things come with age. Things that we fear come with age, but at the same time, there's resilience. You've all talked about resilience, and the fact that people notice and see the resilience and learn from it. And it tells us something about one of those balances or strengths that come with age, challenges, but also strengths and things that we need at all ages to take away from, things that we can glean and that we can learn, because there's something valuable there that aging teaches us. Good stuff here, people. So let's turn to now the topic of ageism, and we said that it was the stereotyping and discrimination of people based on age. And some of you may have experienced ageism, some not. If you've experienced ageism, maybe you could tell us how you experienced that ageism, in what ways did it happen, and how did it make you feel? And if you have not experienced ageism, can you talk about someone else that you might have observed, or some instance where ageism you believe was happening? And how did it make the people in that situation feel? Okay, Alice, talk about ageism.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I think we learn how to be old from older people. So exactly what you said, Sherry, that's who we look to for guidance through this. So we should always be living with older people. I can't say that I feel I've experienced ageism personally, except maybe when I was in my 20s and was being told I was too young for a job. And I do have some problems with the assumption that everyone experiences ageism, because I don't feel it is like racism or gender or those things that are born with us and that we live with all our lives. We're all, God willing, going to get old, and we're going to have to learn how to do that. But it's not, it's a common human experience. I do know that the particular isolation or disadvantage that can come with getting old is very real. And I do know how unequal that experience can be. It affects individuals differently. I know women who have essentially experienced it in their mid-50s. They're at an age where it's hard to find another job, or where they've found themselves by themselves. And they're affected by things like their gender, their education, their income, and their security is, they're very vulnerable. But there are also, you know, guys in professional positions who are on boards of directors in their late 70s, and nobody says they're too old for it. So I don't think it's as uniform an experience as the term ageism might make us think. So I'm a little cautious about using it, and also about programs that treat us all as if we have the same needs. I feel the more we support people throughout their lives, the more resilient they will become to the whole span of life. So that's my thoughts. I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts, Michael.
Well, thanks for that, and it sets a little ground. Yeah, because I have to say that, you know, I claim to be 18 plus, and I do that all the time. You know, people make fun of me, which is fine, but I just revert right back to it and say I'm 18 plus, whatever you want. So, and I realize that's me, and my, you know, my insecurity of getting older is, you know, that's a way to take care of it. I blame it on my mother, who lied about her age all her life, kind of thing. And that right up to when we thought she was going to turn 90, she'd already been 90. And we had it wrong, kind of thing in that. And I'll never forget, we were like, oh, how could this have happened? She lied all the way through. Anyway, what I do see, though, is I've been involved with a group right now that are older persons who are all part of the gay and lesbian community, and we've done a survey. And it's been fascinating for me to see the responses that we're getting. And clearly, number of people who are quite concerned that they will be discriminated against, that people won't treat them well, they will be bullied like they were when they were younger, that their partner will never be treated as an equal, that people that bullied them when they were 25 and now are 75 are still bullying them, that they are, bullying doesn't end, kind of thing in that. And that undermines their sense, and it certainly is a kind of both stereotyping and discrimination. I think it also is the sense that that people will automatically, as Alice, as you've kind of said, share that because that's what people think. Because I remember when I ran for city council, and I first ran, I told my mother that I was going to do that, and of course the first thing she said, "Well, who will vote for you?" And then, but then later on, when I talked to her and said, you know, I'm going to a number of senior centers and that, and she said, "I don't know." She said, "You know, a lot of older people, I don't think they'll be very happy to see you," and the rest of that. And as it turns out, she was wrong, and I was kind of thinking that. And although I could help her, it always hurt a little bit to hear and to see that, because she was my grandmother and quite a you know, decent individual kind of thing in that too. So my own personal experience, other than being 18 plus and people not believing me, has been otherwise watching and seeing what's happened with some others and that, and the future, who knows what that will be like. So Donna, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Well, thanks. Yeah, here's what this was kind of harder for me to kind of prepare for this question. And so I kind of looked at, okay, what is ageism? Well, it's directed at other people, yeah, both really obvious but also, you know, the benign kind of, you know, you don't even realize it's, you know, ageism. You send a birthday card to somebody when, you know, that really tells them they should lose their dentures and, you know, lose their minds and everything else. But then there's also the internal ageism. So, you know, you fear getting old, you think you're going to become sick, and you don't like what you look like and what have you. Well, I've always wanted to lose 10 pounds and have a nicer nose and a few other things. So that's nothing new there. But really, it's in healthcare that I've seen a lot of discrimination against older people, and you know, 40 years of working in hospitals primarily, and not just in Canada, but in other countries. And some of it is the benign kind, the kind of, let's just assume that every older patient or every patient with gray hair is going to be deaf and senile and kind of forgetful and low education and kind of stupid, you know, so you have to repeat things and talk down to them and, you know, maybe make decisions for them. And, you know, that's the benign kind. And I think I'm seeing a lot less of it, particularly because nursing programs and medical programs and other programs really are much more concerned about the rights of people and patient choice and, you know, what have you. But what we saw recently in nursing homes, you know, where older people were protected. And in fact, many of the residents in nursing homes today have had the vaccine for 3-4 months, and yet they still can't have visitors. I mean, you know, and that's a benign kind of ageism. They should have the right to say, you know, I want to be exposed, you know, to all my family and friends and what have you. But the other thing, though, in healthcare is I've seen a lot of really negative and blatant ageism. And if you recall back a number of years ago, there was an 80-year-old man who got a heart transplant in Edmonton. And they've been doing heart transplants in Edmonton since 1985. And about 5 years or so later, hugely controversial. Like, why would you waste a heart on someone who's 80? Well, it didn't matter that he was bright, sharp, ran his own business and what have you. And in fact, he lived 5 years with that heart and never regretted ever having had it implanted. I remember even an American ethicist coming up around that time saying that, you know, really, with a shortage of healthcare, you should just cut people off at age 80. They shouldn't get anything after that. And I remember standing up in the audience and saying, do you mean to say someone who's 25 that's been born with a bad heart and had every surgery in the world and they're dying, they can still get futile health care, but someone who's sharp and running a business and everything can't? And he had no answer for that. But But we still see a lot of that. My stepdad just died 4 months ago, and I had to advocate a great deal for him to get just essential health care. And in fact, had a family doctor kept saying, well, you're old, you're old. Well, that doctor actually was in much worse shape than my stepdad was. And, I had to really be quite strong to advocate for him. And that's a sad state about our healthcare system today. And that's where I'll stop. Thanks.
An interesting discussion this has been. What I've extracted about ageism, because I began introducing the topic and talked about it as if it's pervasive. And the World Health Organization says, we need to take a stand against it. But what I've heard here is that there isn't a uniform experience of ageism. And what can influence the experience of ageism for people? I've heard things like intersectionality, depending on your health, depending on if you are a member of a visible minority, whether you are a member of the LGBTQ2S community. So the different kinds of categories that we can find ourselves in, it used to be called double jeopardy, being an older woman, being an older woman, like the two things together, double jeopardy or triple jeopardy. Now it's talked about the impacts of intersectionality. So whether you're going to experience ageism is dependent on perhaps the categories that we have, but experiences will not be uniform. Interestingly, I think if you highlight for people and ask the question in a different way, you have more people being willing to endorse that they've had ageism. So for example, a recent poll of over 1,500 Canadian seniors, they asked, have you experienced ageism? And almost half, 41%, reported that they had been ignored or treated as if they're invisible. More than a third believed that people assumed they had nothing to contribute. And about a quarter said they believed other people thought that they were incompetent. So if we ask the question in different ways, if we probe it in different ways, I think you'll find people talking about experiences with ageism. But the concept itself is more subtle, and it isn't a uniform experience, but it does happen. And here's another piece that I'm going to add to this, just for reflection for the audience. And it goes back to a story of an older couple that was talking to me about ageism, because they know that I think about these things. And the wife said to me, she was just turning 65, and she said, we were at a desk and we were checking into a hotel, and the person there talked to us in a certain way. And as we were walking away, I said to my husband, who was older than her, didn't you feel patronized? Did you hear the way that she was speaking to us, the person at the desk? And her husband said, how was she speaking to us? I didn't notice anything. So not only is there not a uniform experience and people experience ageism differently, but what the literature actually tells us is that ageism can be blatant, but it can also be very subtle. And it's the stereotypes that we learn as children about what older people are like. We use those stereotypes in our adulthood to interact with people who we see as fitting those stereotypes, who are older. Those stereotypes become so part of how we interact that when we become older and we internalize those stereotypes so that now they apply to me, that when that happens, when that process happens, and you start being treated in the way that you had always treated other people, very subtly, that what happens when you are older is you don't notice it. It is normal. And it is that taking of those stereotypes in that has those negative consequences. So part of this awareness, I think, that we have to have about ageism is that it is subtle, that it is not uniform, but that we may not notice when it isn't blatant, that it is happening, and that it can have an impact. So we've learned a lot here about different views about ageism, but that it can be subtle and that we may not recognize it, and we may need to start to recognize it so that it isn't normalized as much as it can happen, okay? So really really interesting discussion. Took away from this section that it's not uniform. Everyone has a different experience of aging, the importance of the aging experience and ageism with intersectionality, and that it is subtle. This thing that we have to take a stand against can be very subtle. Okay. It's more likely to happen too as you get older and you get more of those cues to age, so ill health, much older age, etc. But such an interesting discussion, so interesting. So let's turn and have a short discussion of how we can view our aging more positively. And it looks like everyone is already viewing their aging positively, but maybe tips, because our collective goal is to try to develop a positive, realistic, not stereotypical, but realistic view of how aging goes. Okay, so how do we have a constructive view of aging? Maybe each of you could give an example of something, whether it be a book or a film or a work of art or anything else that inspires you in later life to view aging realistically, constructively, positively. Alice.
Sometimes it's not what someone else produces that inspires you. It can be what you produce yourself. It's what you make. I'm a poet and an artist. That's been my way of processing my life for all of my life. After my parents died, I felt absolutely stunned. It was 6 weeks apart. And then I found myself writing over the subsequent winter poems that were trying to understand their lives and trying to understand my own and how it was all linked together. And that became a book. Memory's Daughter is the name of it. But what it reminded me is that this can be a very, very creative time of life. We do have that perspective that I was talking about earlier. And creating something, making something can be a real way of managing the experience of growing older. Not necessarily poems, but make a video, tell a story, compose a song, make a quilt, something that records your life, makes your life tangible to yourself and to others around you. And that's, for me, the best advice I could give anyone. Of course, it is kind of the of the nature of, if you're someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in that respect.
Well, I suppose I could say the positive example has been 18 plus, but that isn't it at all. What I really want to talk about, in fact, is a book, a novel that I read probably almost 40 years ago now. That has spoken to me ever since. And it's called Love in the Time of Cholera, which is by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's a Colombian writer who won one of those big prizes in that many years ago. And his most famous book is 100 Years of Solitude. Anyway, the story is about two individuals who in the time of the story are in their 70s or about 70, 71. A man and a woman, and Florentina, who's the fellow, had eyes on this woman over 50 years earlier, but she decided that she wasn't for him, and went on and married someone. And the book begins with them saying, of course, how you forget those things. And then he says, 50 years, 14 days, and 7 hours ago, she rejected me, kind of thing in that. So as he said, these things you forget, kind of thing in that. And the story then moves because her husband has just accidentally died. He fell off of a roof. Was 70 years old as well, kind of thing in that, but fell off his roof and died. And it's a reigniting of the relationship they had back then. And it's an incredibly tender story of two people in their 70s finding a way back together, which wasn't easy. She didn't want anything still to do with him. It took a lot. He was persistent, and a lot of it was done through writing letters to her and back and forth. And the story moves that they finally, get together, and they decide that they're going on a boat that goes down the one of the big rivers. I can't remember if it was the Amazon or not. I forget. That take a trip together, and that's where they kind of consummate their love. And they then realize that people will think they're silly or whatever at that age, and so they talk to the captain of the boat, and who says, "Oh, I know what to do." So he puts up a flag that indicates they have cholera, and so the boat sails forever with the two of them, the captain and his wife, and the cholera flag, and that's how the story ends. But it is the story about the two of them and how they managed to pull themselves together. I mean, it's got the backdrop of what happened earlier, but in the years that they are meeting again at age 70 is just so tender and so wonderfully well written. And his description and the letters he writes are just, they're just beautiful pieces of prose and poetry that he sends to her as he continues courting her, kind of thing. And as she continues to kind of not respond, but does respond, and kind of thing, that it's really quite a delicate story, and quite fun. And the ending is magical, kind of thing. And that it's like, oh my good heavens, kind of thing. That and he is known for his magic realism a little bit as well. So there are a few other places that he pulls out some of the magic realism as well. But it is quite good. So for me, that's a book I've never forgotten, and it still influences me in a very wonderful way. So that's what I have to say. And so Donna, that's up to you.
Well, thank you. I have to say, first of all, I'm a professor, so statistics. So 7 million Canadians now out of 38 million are 65 and over. I mean, that's nearly 18%. And when you think there's another 5.2 that are getting close to age 65, it is true that we are going to get to be about 1 in 3 Canadians, around 30%. It will be 65 and over in 10 years. I mean, we are getting to be like Japan and a lot of European countries and a lot of even Asian countries like China and India and whatever, where a substantial proportion of their population are older. And those countries haven't fallen flat. They, so I'm hopeful, but more directly about, in some ways, there's not a lot of good movies out there. Movies can be very instructing. People watch movies. I love watching movies. I wish every Canadian, young and old, would watch the movie Gran Torino, which came out in 2008. Clint Eastwood starred in it and also directed it. If you don't watch it, watch him in Mule. Both of those were, again, starred and directed in it. He's in his 80s, and he is this crusty, interesting older person. He was born in 1930, and we know Clint Eastwood through his many movies that have kind of paralleled, society, and highlighted things like when he played a trainer in $1 Million Baby, where it was mercy killing and euthanasia, and we now have assisted suicide. But anyway, and we know him as Dirty Harry, a young man, and now he has aged and he's still very valuable. But in Gran Torino in particular, he's an older man, a widower, very typical, living in his own home in a suburb as the society and city changes around him. And multiculturalism is a major feature of the film, which is really relevant in Canada. 21% of Canadians were not born in Canada, and that'll be up to 30% soon. in the movie, he's a really tough guy. He's a war veteran who's done a lot, and he has this prize muscle car, this 1972 Grand Torino, which his neighbor's son tries to steal. And he becomes close to that family and develops a relationship, in a meaningful mentoring relationship with this boy, and the family are so appreciative of it. Now, much of this movie really shows the value of older people, that they are real people. They have quirks and some warts and some value, and they are real people, and they have so much to offer. And, you know, I think really in many ways, this tells us that our life is so much better with older people in our society and in our lives personally. So I love the movie, but Mule was also terrific too. Clint Eastwood, who would know? And I'll stop there. Thanks.
So being creative, and Michael had a book, and Donna has words of wisdom and a movie that she would recommend because of the images of growing older there. And what I have heard from all of you in your individual stories is that the things that influence you, what you find interesting, and when you tell other people about what's interesting to you, and when you point out things that have been interesting to you, what you've learned from, we now know that in this audience, there will be people who will be listening to that and who will be influenced by that in their view of their aging, in what they think is going to be important, in very subtle ways that you're not even knowing. Just like when I ask you to pull out and say, who was an influence with you? You pull out things that people did in their everyday life, things they watched, things they listened to, things they read, that influence other people. So you have influenced us, all of us here today, everyone listening, by your musings about aging and the aging process. And I thank you for that, because we have learned in ways that we don't even know yet, but we will remember. And if I had to extract and say, you know, what are some common themes that we have learned and that we can take away from the discussion we've had today? I think when I talked about ageism and stereotyping, what stereotypes do is that they blow away the individual, and they say, this is what aging is like, and this is what older people are like. And the individual gets lost in those generalized beliefs, those stereotypes. And we need to have conversations like this, because the 4 people on the screen, I'm including myself, are what aging is. Right? This is aging. This is the heterogeneity of the aging experience of all of us. And it doesn't fit the stereotype. We are not the stereotype. And that is something we need to take away, that aging, how we age, the influences on how we age are individual. They are subtle, they are individual, and in many ways under our control. We do not fit the stereotype. And it's in giving into the stereotype that those negative effects happen to health and well-being. So the takeaway message from everything that you have told us today is that you and we are not the stereotype. And as we age, don't give in to that stereotype. And that's how, in one way, that we would counter ageism and its impacts. And the other that we have heard about is that when we think of aging, we think it's something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that's going to happen to us. But what I've heard from you is that it's happening all the time. It's happening throughout your life. You talked about things that happened earlier, things that you were anticipating will happen later. And it's that idea of continuity, that the person inside is not changing. The person inside is the person that you have always been. The outside might be changing, and it might look different, and some of the things that we don't have the strength that we might have had, but the person inside is not changing. So continuity in aging and heterogeneity of aging, I think, are 2 things that I have heard you speak about today, and that I will be taking away from the conversation that we've had. So I thank you for your time, for your musings, for your thoughts, for your influences, and we must do this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. What an interesting discussion. Thank you very much to our moderator, Dr. Kwong Si, and to the panelists, Alice Major, Michael Fair, and Dr. Donna Wilson. Thank you to everyone for joining us.